What happened to the bio? Yeah, I'll put the music back on while we figure that out. What's some layout? There I am. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the delay there. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Glad you all were able to make it. We just wanted to make sure everyone was able to join. Good afternoon. This is the OASV's Engagement Q&A with Jay. I'm Jay Von Howard, Manager of Engagement Initiatives. If you are new here, welcome. This is where we answer all of your frequently asked questions on topics related to men as survivors, including understanding masculinity, men's health, men's healing, social and emotional learning, violence prevention, and justice. Today, we'll be discussing film violence and shaping masculinity with another one of my wonderful colleagues, Jeff Pereira, who I will introduce here in just one moment. As a reminder that this episode is being live streamed on both Facebook and YouTube. Please feel free to utilize our chat feature to share any of your questions, any of your comments, and as we are having our discussion today, being aware that these comments and questions may be seen to the public. Now to introduce our co-host for today's topic, Jeff Pereira. I'm very happy to invite him today for our conversation. He's a new colleague of mine. I'm really excited to get into this conversation with him on film, masculinity, and shaping violence. Since 2008, Jeff Pereira has been speaking to audiences across North America, Turtle Island, about embracing helpful versus harmful ideas of manhood, men striving to be allies towards gender equity, as well as to help end gender-based violences and building bridges across differences. Jeff started Higher Unlearning as an online space to share his written pieces, videos, and TED Talks, exploring how men can be a part of the change by being models of possibility for others. So I'm very excited to introduce Jeff here. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Pretty good. Like I was saying earlier, when we got to get together, I'm very excited for this conversation. We only have so much time together, so I'm gonna go ahead and just jump right in. Um, so the conversation I wanted to have with you was about film, violence, and how that shapes masculinity and connecting that's all these different dynamics around systems of power and ending violence. While I was researching this topic and kind of coming together, asking people for questions, trying to see where we can kind of take this conversation, I came across some interesting lists and ideas about films. And so these are multiple different lists I came across. I was exploring the different ones, but there's one in particular that stood out to me. Was the Men's Journal's top 50 best guy movies of all time. And so I just wanted to get some of your thoughts and first reactions about some of these films that are considered to be like the top guy movies of all time, right? So the first one that we have here is, and not in any particular order, just reading from off the list. We have Dirty Harry. Are you familiar with Dirty Harry? The Godfather, Scarface, Unforgiven, Blade, Enter the Dragon, Dazed and Confused. I'm seeing The Longest Yard, Fight Club. That popped up on several different lists. I just found this interesting that these are considered to be like the guy movies. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I was looking at the list too. And there's a couple others too that to also mention, like Die Hard, Matrix, Rocky, Goodfellas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like you think about what we're saying when we say guys' films or men's films, like I think of for folks really from across North America, but certain communities, certain, I guess, maybe cities, a
Mm-hmm.
film like Scarface is in some neighborhoods it's seen as almost like a Bible for some folks as far as manhood. This idea of like rags to riches, you have to get the money, power, respect. You get the woman, you get the power, you get all these different things, and it's this kind of if you're chasing a harmful, as I describe it, a harmful idea of what it means to be a man, that's the goal, that's the pursuit, that's kind of the path, right? And the question becomes, well, what happens along that journey? Do you ever get to that kind of peak, this idea of power and respect? And it's a very fragile lifestyle, right? Like you're constantly looking behind your shoulder. It feels like you're very much alone, as Tony's character is in that film.
Mm-hmm.
Can't trust his friends and loses relationship with family and loved ones. So it's an interesting story. But one I wanted to really talk about quickly here is The Godfather, which is a classic film, seen as classic cinema. And I don't want to spoil it for folks who haven't seen it, but at this point, it's such a classic film, old film. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to give away too much here. But for those who do recognize and have seen the film, back in the day when I was a kid, and we used to watch TV together, and gather around and watch it. And now we all watch it on our tablets or whatever we do, right? Or our phones. And we used to fight for the remote control, the stereotypical household. Dad had the remote, right? And the
Right.
family would kind of gather and watch. So
Right.
the movie Scarface would come on, and there's a scene in the film, again, not giving everything away, but where Michael Corleone is set up to go into a restaurant and unalive the chief of police, and I can't remember the other person in this Italian restaurant, right? And he does the act, and my dad would change the channel after that. And I thought as a kid the movie ended around there because it's this kind of dramatic close. They show this
Mm-hmm.
fade into the outside of the restaurant, and then it would go fade to commercial, and my dad would change the channel. And I always thought that's when the movie ended. And I remember one day it was late at night. I was flipping the channels, and I had the remote control, and the movie was on. So I was watching it, and that scene comes up, and I realized the movie kept going. It wasn't done. And so what you shortly see after that is the Don's daughter, one of Michael's sister, is now a newlywed in a relationship and is married, and she's pregnant. And it's for back in those days, a pretty graphic depiction. It's a scene of domestic violence where her new husband is angry, is tossing things, starts hitting her with his belt. And one of the scenes is where She runs off camera into the bathroom, and he follows her in there. You don't see what's going on, but you hear the violence, and you hear things getting thrown around, her getting beaten, um, and yeah, and then the film continues. And so I realized as a kid, like, my dad changed the channel because I grew up in a home of domestic violence, and I think that for my father to be in the room when I was in there, and knowing that I was of age that I remember, I remember my mom covered in bruises at the hand of my father. And so I think for him to kind of be in the room and kind of be present with that behavior being depicted on the screen, and also with his son, and to kind of that mirror to kind of face a hard truth, was a
Mhm.
lot for him. So the easiest way was just to change the channel and pretend that scene never happened, and just like pretend that conversation never happened. And I think of the silence for a lot of us as men and young men around things that we've done or not done, like walked away from, things that we participated in, or chose to not say something, the whole spectrum of ways that we contribute to hurt or harm or violence or abuse, or participate in it, don't speak up and say something. So, what's interesting about this list of films, it really depicts, and we'll get into it. I know we'll get into it, but this idea of manhood as you're the hero, it's your journey, you're really alone. You might have a team, but it's on you to do all the things, And it's rare that it shows the complexities of what happens when you fall short, or you are not enough, or you are, just not pulling your weight, or more importantly, it's showing the kind of character integrity that it means to be a man, and how we resolve conflict, how we handle situations. So, I mean, and again, there's so many classic films we can talk about. Society deems them classic. How do we feel about them, right? Like Rocky, you mentioned Dirty Harry. I mentioned The Matrix. It's very influential film, unfortunately, for a lot of ways too, with kind of far right messaging and the idea of taking the pill and all these things. But yeah, there's a lot of ways that it influences and shapes culture, reflects culture. And I'm really happy to talk about it with you and the audience as we kind of get into this. But it's really thinking about how um, we can watch and consume film, right? There's films, I'm sure, that you and I both, Jay, like, we grew up watching, that are influential to us, or kind of, you hear a clip, people talk about it, boom, that's your childhood. But it's not
Right.
necessarily things that align with your values, your ideas of what it means to be a man. So sometimes it's do these things shape who we are? Do we kind of take it and go, no, I reject these things? I can watch it as entertainment, but with like media literacy, be able to say, these aren't ways that I would, uh, navigate life, encourage others to do. And
Mhm.
that's the question: is where's that line? Like, are we able to determine when the things we're watching or consuming? And of course, we could also talk about music and TV. This is about film,
Right.
but think about how these things shape us, and what we can do around how we allow it to shape us.
I really appreciate your approach on how you were thinking about like these films. There's so many things that you were saying. Like one, like how these films are kind of designed in such a way of showing like not only the same depictions of like this stoicism of masculinity, this masculinity where you have to be a provider and be strong. It sort of almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in such a sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it shows that the story is inevitable, that you're going to have to go through a particular type of rough journey. It's going to be on your own. You're not going to be supported. You have to, like you're saying, from rags to riches. Which brings me to my next thing is like it's interesting like how all the stories, like you were saying about like the story ends there, but it doesn't
Mm.
really ends there, but the journey continues and how we actually depict or not depict those type of struggles for men. Um, I don't know. I was thinking it was just really fascinating with that. It had me thinking, leading us to like our next question. Um, do you think this gives like realistic glimpses into the lives of men and men's issues? You know, are there any examples you can think of? I mean, you just discussed a little bit about your experience with like how it's like a mirror. It can show you who you are, it can reflect sort of that shortcoming. um I wonder if like men have that, is that like a real experience that men have where we start off feeling like we're less than, feeling
Mm-hmm.
shamed, feeling blamed, feeling like we have to become men, you know, like, and there's this whole journey through it, and there's an inevitability of it. And it encompasses so much violence, whether that's us doing violence against ourselves or violence against others. You know, is this, can our films such as Scarface, such as, you know, The Godfather, such as Dirty Harry, you know, are these films good depictions of what it is like for men to
Mm-hmm.
win and how that shapes the real lives of our experience?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you think we not to keep talking about Scarface, but one of the things about that film that I think is really fascinating is in the end, Tony's character dies, right? Like he doesn't
Mhm.
succeed, right? His goal is to reach the mountaintop, and he's taken out. And we think about in our lives, like whatever your pursuit is, your life's journey. If you look at Tony and go, well, that's that's the way, right? Like
Yeah.
that's our journey, right? You don't make it. And I think about for a lot of us as men, like a lot of the films we watch, the hero conquers, wins, the main character in the story gets whatever it is done in the film and succeeds. But we know in life, for a lot of us, we're not going to always succeed. Things don't always work out. That's the unfortunate nature of our society. And we could talk about capitalism, all these different structures and how they impact us
Mhm.
and who gets left behind, in particular communities of color. We think of trans communities, we think of indigenous, native folks. Um, and so, when we look at that, you could argue and say, well, that's an actual vulnerable depiction in that this character doesn't make it, which is very rare in these stories. You think of other examples of glimpses into reality. There's a film that I love, but not everyone's, I don't know how people feel about it, but there's a film called Interstellar, a Christopher Nolan film starring Matthew McConaughey. It's a film where, the quick version is that Earth is becoming non-habitable. Like it's there's no way to grow anything other than corn as a
Mhm.
resource to eat. And it's kind of haunting to think about kind of where we're at with the climate and where society's going on our planet. And so, NASA is basically planning to uh, move humanity to another planet, and they need to use time warp, all this fancy stuff to kind of bend time and go into another dimension.
Mhm.
And McConaughey's character is a retired pilot who is the best. And so they come to him and like, we need you to do this and do this now. And he's a loving father who lives with his father and his two children, a son and a daughter. And he's given this truth, and he has literally no time. He has to make the decision. And basically, the planned trip is that it's going to take years, human like life years here on Earth, to go and come back. So he's going to miss his kids' childhood. He's going to miss a lot of they're going into adulthood and how much they need him to survive what's happening here on Earth. But
Mhm.
the mission is that you're going to save humanity. And I think for a lot of men, like we think of you know, our journeys, our careers as kind of like, well, this is the greater good. I'm taking care of the family. I have to do these things. So daddy has to be away. I'm not here. I'm missing baseball practice, recitals, missing important moments, quiet conversations that are just as important, like doing homework, questions that kids have, just being present, sitting and watching a movie together, right? And so Matthew's character is like, yeah, I have to do this. And the daughter and he, like the son kind of has a stoic like turn away, like do what you got to do, I'll be the man of the household kind of thing. But the
Mhm.
daughter and him have a very, just tragic kind of, go leave me, and he has to run off, and they don't have a nice goodbye, and that's haunting for him. And it kind of depicts kind of some of those. It's a bit on an extreme level, but the kind of like interdynamics of how we make choices of what we value in our relationships. And
Yeah.
I think of another quick example, which is a bit of extreme. There's a film called American History X, which is a very brutal, raw depiction of a young white man who enters a neo-Nazi movement, becomes a leader in that movement, goes to prison, has an awakening, and comes out of it rejecting hate, rejecting those movements.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of white men right now, it's navigating, you know, their journey with hatred, journey with whiteness, journey with um, moving into these movements, whether they're actually moving to the movements or just what they're coming to realize about themselves and coming out of those movements, how hard it can be to reject and kind of reprogram, unlearn all these things.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think there's those are extreme moments, but you can see everyday moments in films where it can be just a man trying to connect with his wife or his kids. A man feeling like wrestling with struggle, wrestling with adversity, and not knowing how to handle it. And for a lot of times, and we'll talk about it, one of the ways that we handle problems as men is violence. That's depicted as the solution, and we'll talk a bit about that. So, yeah, really quick. Like I don't want to go on and on because we got a lot to get to, but those are some examples off the top of my head. But like there are so many stories that are out there, films that aren't as big blockbuster films that do show a bit more of a kind of realistic glimpse into a man's life. But even in the bigger stories, we can see these moments, these beats where it's like at the end of the day, this is a human being dealing with what do I do? How do I do it? How do I make this work? How do I make ends meet? How do I solve the problem? And for a lot of men, we feel that our entire worth is defined by how we solve problems, how we handle the issue,
How
how we take
predictable
care.
we are, you know? Yeah, like I definitely were in the same headspace as you with us. Like we feel like we have to be productive all the time. I feel like this is a similar conversation that we can have when we're having like conversations about fatherhood and parenting and family.
Yeah,
Like building community and like
yes,
building collaborations. There's so much of a great emphasis on competition. We're not even realizing that's what we're valuing over family, over collaboration and connection. I think it's really fascinating that so many of these stories do require us to leave the home and leave behind what we love the most in order to keep that safe and keep that protected and to actually express that love. And I was questioning, like, what would it look like? Would it be more powerful to actually be present with the things that you love and be present with the people that you care about? Isn't that
hmm,
powerful? What is it that they're even asking for? Like, in the story of Interstellar, like it was the government who was like, hey, do this thing for us. And his daughter was like, hey, no, don't, just stay with me. He's like, well, I'm
yeah,
doing this for you. It's like, no, I asked you to stay with me. They asked you to do this other thing, and you're doing this other thing, saying that you're doing it for me. And it's really about this performance of like masculinity, this performance of duty to your man,
hmm,
your duty to how you're supposed to show up as a provider. And so yeah, so many different things. So I don't want to get off into a little tangent myself because I know again, like we were saying, like we have a lot of great questions that came in for this topic. I'm gonna make sure we try to get to each of them, and we've already touched on a few of them, like tangentially a little bit. But I want to get into a more specific one for our service providers, for our advocates and our prevention educators that are listening, folks who are invested in doing men's work, men's outreach, serving male survivors, doing violence prevention. What are suggestions for how we can come up with innovative ways to include film, include storytelling, in doing that type of men's work and men's outreach? Like, can we use film to transform the culture as much as we're being influenced by it?
absolutely. I think that you know, it's like when you drive by a bakery and they're making some fresh bread, and you smell that bread boom, right? Or like you smell the cookies, or you smell like a perfume or a cologne, and it reminds you of someone from, like, a friend from back in the day, or someone you were dating. He used to always wear that cologne or perfume, right? Like, there are things that kind of can activate and take you to a place a lot stronger than, me describing it. You smell it, boom, you're there. And I think that film can do that, where if I show you, if I'm trying to, like, if I'm working with a group of young men, right, let's say, and I'm talking about men being like how we uh try to man up and use violence and intimidation, right? The young men might be like, all right, yeah, okay, whatever. But if I show you a clip from a film, maybe one of their films, or a classic film, or a film that really depicts what we're talking about, you play that 2-minute clip, and they're like, okay, it's like, boom, fresh bread. They smell, they're like, I know what you're talking about. I've been in that situation, or I see what you're saying. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
can pick it up, I can get it. So there's a there's a session that I used to run back in the day, and I encourage folks to go ahead and make a variation of it. Feel free to invite, myself, maybe Jay and I, to like to co-facilitate it. But if you all want to do it, please go for it. I called it Men on Film. You can call it what you want. But essentially, what it is pretty straightforward. I picked a few clips from, again, mainstream films. I use TV shows as well, but you can take these clips and think about what you want to talk about with your group. If you're working with young male athletes, young men, people of all genders, right? Audiences of all genders, or audiences where specifically male identified folks that you're really trying to speak to a certain issue about, and you play clips from films or shows that depict those moments, that gives them a kind of a light bulb moment. And you play the clip, and then you talk about it. So you play a 3-minute clip and then debrief it. And I'll try to give you a quick example, be really quick, of one that I love to use. So we talk about violent films and being a non-violent, anti-violent person. Well, this is a TV show, and the show's The Sopranos. And the show, like, for me, there was no characters in that show were salvageable. They were all problematic, messed up people. But what I appreciated about the show was the honest depiction of that. And for me, it was like, I could take that and talk to people about how this is all harmful. Look where it gets you. Look how it makes things worse, right? So the clip I would show, Tony Soprano, the mob Don in New Jersey, was shot. He's back on the job. So it's like his first day back at work. And his wife is like standing at the door, like, kind of like has his lunch, like, take good care. He's supposed to be this big monster. It's like his job is dependent on everyone fearing him, right? But now he's this fragile, weak, like he's walking slow. He's got these wounds that are still healing. And they've hired this young driver to drive him around. He's not driving his own truck. Some
Mm-hmm.
young kid, big, beefy, like, gym guy, is driving him around. So he gets to the deli, which is like their kind of meeting place, and he sits in the back with all the captains at this table. And usually he comes in, and they're all kind of, respectful and fearful, but they're all kind of gathered around him, and they get him his sandwich, and the guy goes, "Here's your sandwich. How you like it, Tone?" And he's like, "Oh, I got to take the peppers out." And they're like, right away. And they're all kind of like taking his sandwich and cleaning out the peppers. He's like, I can't with my, my stitches. I got to be careful of the wound, right? He's trying to like, I'm still a man. I can eat spicy food. It's just that, and so he's sitting there and looking at, it shows like from his perspective, he's looking at all the captains, but he's looking at their muscles. So the camera shows him looking at all their arms and who has the biggest arm. And so
Mm-hmm.
he finally sees the young kid, his new driver, who's wearing a sleeveless shirt and has big muscles, right? So it's this great moment where Gandolfini, the actor, kind of sees the kid's arm. His face almost goes green as he thinks about what he's about to do, and then he kind of takes a deep breath and he becomes the monster, right? He becomes the person he's projecting to show fear and get respect from his team. And he says, "What's your problem?" to the kid. And the kid's like, "What? He's like, "Why'd you kick the chair there? Like, like, you think you're some big shot?" Like, I'm censoring the language, right? And the kid's like, "Tone, I didn't." And Tony's like, "Look at this, like, wise ass kid." And he sucker punches the kid. And the kid goes to react because he's a young like street fighter, right? And he comes up to go hit him, and the captain is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! No, you can't do that. You can't hit the boss, right?" And the boss just lays into him, and everyone's kind of looking like, "What is going on here? What? This is madness, right?" And then Tone leaves the kid, and he walks off into the bathroom. And he goes in the bathroom, and he spits up blood, and he's not doing well, but he looks in the mirror and he's smiling. He's looking at himself and smiling, like, yeah, you did a good job. You showed them you're still the man. You're the boss. And I play that clip for young people, like not too young, but like teens and young adults, and they got it right away. They're like, whether it's the code of the street or just this is what it is, like you got to prove your manhood in everyday moments. So you play a clip, it doesn't have to be that extreme. You can play a clip of a father and a son having a conversation. You can play a clip of, a man on a date, two men on a date. You can play all these different things and kind of pause the clip or end the clip and be like, what did y'all think about it? And get reactions, get thoughts. And it allows you to move into what you're trying to really bring home for them, like the points you're trying to bring home. And again, it's not that I'm sure you all watching are incredible speakers or storytellers and facilitators, but all the tools we can get, the better. And sometimes to kind of give you a raw depiction of this is fiction. It's not real. It's not a documentary, but
Right.
here's what it looks like, right? And does this look familiar? Does this ring a bell? In our behavior, attitudes as men, how we resolve, handle situations, handle crisis, handle everyday interactions, handle communicating with people we love, people we work with. So I think that's a great way to kind of really quickly, help get a conversation cooking and going.
Yeah, I like those suggestions. And the reality is, like, there are probably so many examples that you could probably pull from so many different films. I think I was reading, it was Bell Hooks, and maybe it was In the Will to Change. Maybe it was another film, another one of her books, but I definitely recommend Bell Hooks all the time for like researching masculinities and different feminisms. But she had made a point about masculinity and this depiction in film that when there is like more of that expansive, less restrictive version of masculinity available for men, and you go find those clips of their journey where they are choosing to be exercising strength without violence, that they are choosing, their family over being a provider, and these more like hegemonic traditional stereotypes and tropes of what it means to be a man. Oh no, I lost my train of thought.
But yeah, we were talking about Bill Hooks and talking about kind of like
Yeah, that she was saying that a lot of those men's destinies always end up in like a failure of that performance of manhood, that they are not in the end rewarded per se, like they don't get the victory. When we're talking about that triumph, that victory, they may have more success in their relationships, more success in that collaboration. So it's like trying to find different kinds of variations of clips, like not just showing and finding clips that depict the journey of like that stereotypical masculinity, what it means and looks like to be having to defend your masculinity, how to show that, but also like some of those alternatives, and then like even having a discussion on like how men may struggle to choose this alternative if this alternative leads to them not getting the girl, not getting the love, not winning, being humiliated, maybe not even surviving to the end of the story. Where do we actually celebrate and continue to uplift, that as a win, and not necessarily just like, oh, this is just the other story. This is what happens to the other guy. The other guy is the loser. The other guy is the villain.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to sort of ask what your thoughts would be about, again, so returning a little bit to shaping and how this influences identity shaping. But for a lot of young men these days, I was reading some studies, also getting prepared, a part of this conversation, that a lot of young men are finding that there are more role models and mentors and fictional characters than they're finding within like actual people that they know. So they're more online influencers, like on YouTube, content creators, film characters, like Iron Man, folks, Spider-Man, like these popular characters that you see in film, like even like in Fight Club, like these are the folks that are seen as like people's role models. Like, what are your thoughts about that? Like, is that like a good shift that we're seeing? Like, doesn't mean that we should start putting more positive role models into film, or are we missing something that we should have more role models in real life instead of leading folks and using film as that source?
Yeah, it is a real, I think, critical conversation to have in 2025, right? Because it's a very unique conversation. I think for me, I'm turning 50 this year. So back in the day, for a lot of, especially young men of color, young boys of color, obviously in particular, young black boys, young black men, um, their father figure was Heathcliff Huxtable, right? The Cosby Show, and that's a whole conversation about him, right? But the character, the show, you could argue which was a pretty, like, there are times in the later years of the show it showed kind of a more conservative leaning, but it's a show that depicted a father that was present, was loving, was strict, but also was there to talk to you, and you could go to, like, the kids when they messed up, they could go to dad, and dad would give it to them, but also be loving and like help them figure it out, and the mom as well, right? It was a team. It wasn't just dad solving things. It was the dad and mom working together. And that's a depiction that kind of, give you an example of like, here's what's missing in my own life. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of young men and men today, having a present living role model that you can interact with, and it doesn't have to just be a father or father figure, a caregiver. I think that having, because a lot of young people don't feel comfortable going to that person in their life, an authority figure, if
Mm-hmm.
you will. So having a peer, someone that's an equivalent they can go to. And a lot of young men are struggling with social anxiety too, like social skills coming out of the pandemic. I think a lot of young men are wrestling with that. And, um, you know, think of our young boys that went to school through a computer, right? Like went to school through, online for some of their years in middle school and high school. So, being able to kind of build relationships, friendships where you can sit in person with one on one, like face to face with someone. So all that to say, like a lot of the online influencers that we're seeing, whether it's live streamers, on YouTube or Twitch or wherever they are watching in Discords and whatnot, the feeling is like it's like they're they're almost like on their phone FaceTiming with this person. This person's talking to like thousands and thousands of people, but it
Right.
feels like you're just talking to me. We're just hanging out. It's kind of like how podcasts, you feel like you're hanging out with the two or three people or that one person in conversation, right? Um, it's a nice feeling when you don't have that in your life, right? And so one of the beauties is that people can find voices that help them kind of solve and figure things out. But one of the challenges is that they're finding voices that are more kind of showing them, ways to be dominant, ways to be harmful, ways to not handle situations in a good way, and I get that people will be, well, boys will be boys, and they will want to levitate toward people that are kind of like more like clowns or acting the fool, or people who are like, and we keep talking about these names like the Andrew Tates of the world, that are like, I'll tell you how to make it. Like, I see you struggling and you're having a hard time, you're broke, you don't have a girl, you're not pushing a Lamborghini, whatever. It's like, I'll give you what it takes. And it's not just the actual things, it's the persona, it's the
Mm-hmm.
character, right? Because for a lot of young men and men, we realize early on that these ideas of manhood are performance. We're watching these actors on film, on TV, portraying these characters. And a lot of times we feel that we have to portray a version of ourselves. You have to act. So in the moment you see a girl you like, you're trying to impress these guys over here, you're trying to be the class clown and like, or be the cool guy in school, and in your adulthood at work, at the party, at the club, with your friends, with your partner, you're performing a version of yourself that you think people want to see, that you think people will respect. because if I'm being my actual real self, maybe people won't. If I don't show that I don't know what it takes, I need help. You think about the male character in films. Like, how often do you see them go to a therapist or go and like get counseling or ask for help? I mean, they have those moments too, right? Where they'll go to the wise one, they'll get that
Mhm.
advice that unlocks the idea, and then they go off and solve the problem, not necessarily as a team. What There's some good things about some of the action films, right? Like, what is cool about the Avengers is that they're kind of a crew, and they help each other, they support each other. We can talk about how they solve problems, right? But that's at least one interesting thing, is that, and we can talk about Captain America as maybe more of the healthier role model out of them all, a bit of
Mhm.
a wiser. Cap is like, like a bit of a, the way his masculinity is depicted, is kind of, it is a bit of a traditional masculinity, but there's some things there we can take it, and he's trying to navigate things with integrity, looking out for one another. What's the right thing to do here, and to look after one another. So it's interesting. Like, there are things that we're seeing where it is helpful, because there are communities that people, when you are like a fan of Andrew Tate's or of this Twitch streamer, you're part of a community. And what
Right.
we want is connection. We want belonging. We want to feel like we belong to something, a movement, a group of people, that we're not alone, right? But the problem is, like, do these movements actually leave you off feeling alone because you're not really getting the nutrients you need for your own humanity, or are we creating spaces of community as progressive movements? I mean, that's the critical other piece of this, right? Are we creating those kind of spaces and role models and voices that people can turn to and come to? Hopefully you have that in your life, in your community, but we need more of them. We need more people to step up and to be someone that young people and people are our age, like elders can support young men, or like men of any age, right? Etc. But yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting, the kind of the time that we're in, and thinking about social media and technology and how we consume stuff. I mean, so many people are watching things on YouTube like this conversation, right? So hopefully people find healthier, helpful role models versus the harmful ones.
Yeah. It's sort of like a spiral that folks can get pulled in if they're starting off feeling like a failure, feeling ashamed, feeling like they're not meeting the standard of masculinity, and they
Mm-hmm.
get pulled into this virtual or online community. They're finding these and seeking these like fictional characters and fictional depictions of masculinity and comfort. And like the Andrew Tates of the world, like, hey, we can help you fix it. We can build this community, this space to help you actually live the experience that you're seeing in those films. Put some action into your life, make you more fascinating, more interesting. But at the end of the day, because it's set up to be breaking people down, and working against their self-image, working against their body image, working against their integrity,
Mm,
that they're always feeling like they're failing. And if they
yeah.
continue to feel ashamed like they're failing, then they get pulled into it again because it's like, oh, well, this is the only place that's going to fix me. This is the place where I'm going to find that community. These are the people who are going to understand what I'm going through. And so it's almost like this hazing process as well,
Mm,
in a sense. Like it's like
mm,
multiple layers of things and how this performance becomes linked between film, online harassment, online like communities, and all of these things. Um, and so, thank you so much, Jeff. We're going to take a quick little pause here and check and see if there's any comments or other questions. Um, we love to have any folks who are joined with us to include any of their own comments, any questions while we're having this conversation. There's anything else we want to add? So let's see. I'm noticing a couple of things about rites of passage,
mm.
Barbie. I feel like I've seen that you've had some conversations in the past about Barbie. Barbie's an excellent example of how they were depicting different kinds of masculinities. I think that was a really interesting film. I know that a lot of folks did not like it.
Yep.
There's multiple layers to why that was the case. But I
Yep.
think kind of can connect a little bit with one more question that we might be able to get to within our time here. Um, we do talk a lot about violence prevention and masculinity. A lot of these conversations are always about men, right? At the end of the day,
Mm.
trying to end violence, end sexual violence. My role is focused mostly on serving male survivors and working toward ending violence for toward men. And that conversation and that work is not separate from the work of ending violence against women. And so my approach tends to be very similar into trying to get folks engaged around that. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask was how can we get more men involved in conversations to be curious about women's issues and women's stories? We talk a lot
Yeah.
about women's stories. We have even like when I was doing the research about like who was interested in learning more about masculinity in film, there were vastly more writing by women wanting to learn about men's issues from men's perspectives. Like, where and how can we encourage more men to be more curious in the same way about women's stories and women's issues, so that we can ultimately end violence for us all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it speaks to the larger kind of work that we're trying to do, where ultimately it's about engaging men and young men and boys to value women's words, their bodies, their lives, right? And we think about that. That includes gender expansive people, non-binary people, um, and so when we think about in the perspective of film, the men the list of guys films, it kind of shows like how you resolve conflict, how you handle problems, and it's like it's a manly way to do things,
Mhm.
and depictions where men will talk, will resolve, de-escalate conflict, or kind of like build connection. That's seen as feminine. That's seen as like soft, right? It's like not recognizing true strength. True strength is not masculine or feminine. It's human, right? To be able to connect, to build, to resolve conflict in a helpful way. Like there's a film, another alien film I love called Arrival, where these I don't know if you've seen it, Jay, but like these basically like aliens come to Earth and they're just kind of hanging out in these big spaceships. And they're what humans realize is they're able to kind of go into the ship and the aliens are trying to communicate. So they get all these linguists from around the world to try to sit with these aliens in the ship and like have these moments to try to decipher each other's language, to learn that language to help them understand English. Like I'm trying to communicate to you, right? And ultimately, the conflict is resolved not through like laser beams and blowing up stuff, but through communication, right? And so I think for men seeing that, they might be like, "Oh, this is like a girl's version of an action movie, right?" Because they're not like going to war with the aliens, right? And in the film, the army is like depicted as ready to go, right? We got to shoot them down, all this stuff, and it escalates like as a potential war conflict. But it shows that what we dismiss as feminine traits are just as valuable, empathy, compassion, emotional literacy, learning how to read body language, to communicate, to express, to seek consent in situations,
Yeah.
because and this ties to like to break the binary. I think means we have to talk about it, because there are a lot of people who don't, and it's clear, it's evident in 2025, there are a lot of people that don't get what you and I are talking about, right? So when we talk about Barbie, yes, people had criticism about it. It wasn't an advanced dialogue in feminism and etc. But for me, I thought it was like this is a 101 like entry point for a lot of audiences who go to movies just for watching a movie and are being introduced to the concept of what women are going through, and then this depictions of men. And it is the binary, but it's like it's helping them see what they're not seeing. And once you see it, then you can unlearn it, you can break it, you can make the changes you need to make in your own life, and then modeling that to others. So to value the humanity of women and gender expansive people, part of that is also to value our humanity as men, because once we value our own humanity, then we can see the humanity in others. And so for me, what that means is like my idea of being a human being has to value the things that I consider feminine, and then realize, oh, they're not actually just feminine, they're human, right?
Mhm.
So the quick way to think of it is like if you think of manhood, masculinity, the way you accessorize it, it's like a tool belt. What tools do you have in your tool belt as a man to navigate life? So if you have an actual tool belt and the only tool you have in your tool belt is a hammer, you can imagine how you fix projects and assemble things, right? When you need a screwdriver, you need a sandpaper, you need measuring, whatever, all the tools you need. The only thing you have is a hammer, and that's how you're going to crash and bang everything, right? And
Mhm.
smash things. And that's what we as men do. For a lot of us as men, the only tool we have in our emotional toolkit is a hammer, and that's how we solve problems. And in Hollywood, in films, that's how it's depicted, right? The dude solves the problems through, whether it's physical violence, and it's important to point out, it can also be emotional violence, it can be coercive violence, right? The ways that men resolve conflict. I'm trying to think of an example, but it's not always fisticuffs, it's not always guns or whatever, right? So it's
Mhm.
thinking about valuing those tools, the tools that we consider feminine. And then what we end up doing is we're valuing also the people who speak those things, so that when women talk about empathy and talk about ways to solve issues, we're valuing their voices. We're also valuing their bodies and their choice, their self-determination in life, and their lives, right? So I think that it's a step-by-step process. And I think in film, we can value the depictions that are healthier and helpful examples, right? Of how it's about our humanity, and it's about recognizing masculine and feminine traits are really human traits. So being assertive, being dominant, being loving, being empathetic, these are human traits.
I love how you answer that question. I really, really appreciate that so much. I had to stifle a laugh a little bit when you said, but the tool belt and the hammer, because that's such a perfect way of describing it. I try my best to describe it like, like understanding like masculinity as like an accessory to
Mm,
patriarchy, but describing it as a tool belt, it's like a perfect analogy. So thank you for that so much. Um, so we are coming down to our last 5 minutes together. Thank you so much for this conversation. This has been wonderful. There's so many things that we've been able to learn and cover in a short period of time. So I really appreciate
mm.
it. Is there anything within our last closing minutes together that you wanted to talk about or share? Any work that you're doing that you want to highlight? What's your favorite movie?
Well, I'll tell you that again, like we talked about, like, you and I think some of the folks were anti-violence is important. And it's funny because like a lot of the films that I really appreciate are violent films, I have to admit, but I don't love or appreciate the violence within them. I'll give you an example. A film that people kind of like, it's a very dark film, the film Seven. And what I loved about Seven is Morgan Freeman's character, Detective Somerset. I mean, he's a cop and he's got a gun, right? Okay, so we can have that conversation. But what he is trying to demonstrate is the way he tries to solve issue is through intellect. He's reading, he's researching, he's trying to also help the young, Brad Pitt's character, Miles. I can't remember what his name was, but he's trying to help him. Like, you don't have to use your brawn and like brutality. Like, just step back, exhale, see the larger picture here, see what's happening. And I mean, it's a violent film, it's a very gross film, but it's also to me, in all that darkness, like the state of the world we're in, you can be this model, like a lighthouse. You can be a light in these moments. And I want to also quickly mention, really quick, two other films: Malcolm X, the Spike Lee film,
Mhm.
Philadelphia with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington, two Denzel films. Really just diverse depictions. Like Denzel in Malcolm X, like Malcolm is like his autobiography is like 10 different people. He has to play 10 different characters. I mean, it's the same person, right? But you know what I'm saying? Like all the journey in Malcolm's life, going
Mhm.
from, being Red, being Malcolm Little, to the person that we kind of knew publicly, but also the private human being, right? A father, a husband, and a role model to men in his life. Like, these are great films that I think showed these depictions. And Philadelphia is a film about a lawyer who was fired for his HIV status and for being gay, and Denzel, you know, um, represents him in court. Tom Hanks's character.
Mhm.
It's really beautiful depictions of men and men kind of just like Denzel's character kind of coming around, Tom Hanks being very vulnerable in it. Yeah. So, and if people want to check out my work, can go to look me up, Jeff Pereira, Higher and Learning, to find out more about what I do, read my things, watch things I put out there, articles, videos, and whatnot. But appreciate all the work that you all do, especially here at the Ohio Alliance, and like you and your team, Jay, and all the work. And thank you for this space to have this conversation. And for those watching now or the recording, keep the work going, keep the conversation going. It's so important, and finding new ways to do it, and like this, having conversations like this, and hopefully utilizing film um, gives us opportunities to have these conversations in deeper ways. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate you so much, Jeff. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your time. We're definitely going to drop links for folks within the chat or at least below the video so folks will be able to get in contact with you, be able to find any additional work that you're doing. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and close. Thank you all again for joining me for our Engaging Men Q&A, Q&A with Jay. We do this about 3 to 4 times a year. We have our next Q&A that is coming up in November. The topic will be Men of Faith and Healing and Recovery. You can use this QR code to drop any questions that you have for that Q&A. You'll go into this, it'll bring up my technical training assistance form. Go straight to the bottom, select which Q&A that you want to submit a question for, and submit any questions or comments you have there. You can also use this training technical assistance form to get any other information about Engaging Men initiatives for any trainings, resources, and any programming that you may need. Please also visit www.oaesv.org for any other information about our coalition. See you all next time and appreciate you. Take care.